folks, to the 27th of March Aries Working Group call. Glad you're here. This is Hyperlogic Call, so the antitrust policy and the code of conduct are in effect. The wiki page for the meeting notes can be found in the chat, also in the normal spot in the Hyperlogic wiki. And you're welcome to make any changes. They will not be shown live, but they will be merged in, and so that folks can access links and other sorts of useful stuff. There we are. Is there anyone new that would like to introduce themselves? All right. Announcements. IW is coming up a couple of weeks away. I encourage if you're able to attend, that's a valuable conference covering lots of related topics that are interesting to Aries efforts and others in the industry. And also, Stephen, should I explain? Do you want to explain the Be Sovereign networks?
Yeah, just briefly. Wade went over this last week, but Be Sovereign has had Be Sovereign test is pointed to by many mobile wallets, so people can use it to test out mobile wallet features and stuff like that. It remains and will continue indefinitely. We're not taking that one away, but we consolidated a bunch of other ledgers that we were running. Green Knight, it should say Green Light, but so a bunch of other ledgers were there, all similar, and so we just tweaked them to Green Light. Keep the N.
Nice.
We had just got rid of the other instances. They weren't providing any value. The only possible risk to others is that if they had something permanent that they had created on those and were using in an ongoing basis on those other ledgers, those are now gone away because all those ledgers point to the same one. The reason we did that was there's lots of tutorials and things that say, hey, go to, create a did on Be Sovereign Greenlight, and so now that will continue to work as long as because it'll just create it on Be Sovereign test. So anyway, the URLs will all still work and all that. So anyway, Be Sovereign test is not going away for anyone worried about that.
Cool. Thank you for that update. Any other announcements we should have but don't? All right, any release status work updates?
I don't know. This is an old one from Akapai, but anyway, we're about to release 0.12.0 RC3. It'll probably go out today. It will be the last one prior to the final 0.12.0 release, and we'll follow it pretty quickly after with 1.0. So everything is now done. We've got one more PR to be reviewed and merged. And that one is, I believe, complete. That PR is complete. So we'll be doing that today, releasing 0.12.0 RC3 and publishing.
Cool.
So excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's major progress. Any other updates folks want to share?
I was on the Bifold call yesterday, and I guess they have a PR in for to merge a Credo 0.50, which recently released, and they're planning on doing a 1.0 based on that soon. I don't know what that means in terms of actual time, but the PR is almost ready to be merged for that, for the Credo
Awesome.
release.
Very cool. Other updates? Okay. Things on our agenda. Stephen asked to talk about the RFC Make Docs demo, get some feedback. This was referred to last week. This was very cool. And so we have that. Patrick has asked some time for a general VCX update. So that's available. And then briefly touch on the DidCom V2 conversion stuff. Again, looking for any volunteers that would like to get involved there. There's several of us that will eventually get there, but if you want to speed it up, then that's a good way to make it happen. And then a discussion that we didn't get to last time on a basis for common identifiers. And so that's what's on the agenda. Any changes that we want to make before we get going? All right. Stephen, over to you.
All right, let me share screen. There we go. See my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so created a so what I've done is created a generator for a MakeDoc site that I'll show you in a moment. The process of it is to delete any existing docs file directory, recreate it, copy the top level MD files into it, copy the features and concepts into it, and then make a copy of the correct commits around the AIP2. So it generates a second copy of all of the AIP2 RFCs at the commit they are expected to be. So that gets done. We do a bit of cleanup on some of the docs and you'll see a bunch of errors that come out of this. And then we generate navigation for the site so that we have a navigable site that hopefully makes sense. Although that's some of the feedback I want to get. And all that done, and we now have a MakeDoc site. So if I run it, which is just I run MakeDocs. So I've run that script. Yeah, I might as well run it. Code/gen site. This takes a moment. What's happening here is all of the curls are being done to get all of the RFCs, the files from the RFCs at the proper commit. So I've got a little copy script that does an actual curl of the exact commit of each AIP file and pushes it out. And it does that recursively, so we pick up all of the ones like protocols has a bunch of subfolders and so on in it. So when that's done, that also generates and updates the navigation for it. So we've got a navigation section that has the welcome, the governance, and then generates the actual navigation that you're going to see on the site. So with that, I can now run, and what you see is a whole pile of errors. There's 247 lines. I'll go over that in a bit after I show the site and talk about what's next with these. You'll notice a lot of them say things like mail tos are errors and things like that. So once I have that, I can open the site. And hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So we've got our welcome. We actually have all of the RFCs. This is the index file, the template, and so on. We have governance that talks about who the maintainers are, contributing, and so on. Again, I've not generated any new content. This is just content that's there. Then I've got the AIP2 list of protocols, and then go through the various statuses that are there. A lot of this, the generation of these, stems off the code that Daniel Hardman wrote. I'm not a developer, so I just did the tweaks that I could do. So things like moving, the ordering of these, I guess they are in the kind of right order with adopted, accepted, demonstrated. The important thing and the thing I want to draw attention to is the AIP2 ones and being able to see which ones are part of AIP2 and then be able to navigate through them and find various things. So that's the overall work I've done so far. Left to do is add a GitHub actions to this so that this demonstrates generates automatically on merge. So that will happen so that we get an update automatically whenever we merge. That'll include generating the index and all that stuff. Obviously, I was going to show the cleanup that needs to happen. A lot of the errors have to do with, as I mentioned, email addresses being wrongly mistaken as links. So just some cleanup there. There's a bunch of relative links in various files, some of which can be processed just by this script so that the links are corrected. Others we'd actually correct in the source. So I would do an update to the source to correct the links. Want to do work to make sure that when we're looking at this, the focus is really on AIP2. So adding text to that extent, like the life cycle as being a text, this shouldn't be the welcome. This should be part of the governance section that talks about, how you make RFCs and so on. So I really want to put this is what RFCs are and how you use them and so on and so forth. And then the other thing that becomes obvious to me when I look through some of these is going through and moving a whole pile of the proposed into retired and things like that, and perhaps leaving retired off of this site entirely. Maybe merging the proposed and retired so that it reduces their focus. So ideas like that to really draw the attention to AIP2, which is what matters so far on this. Finally, potentially repeat this process, but do it in a way that merges the Aries RFCs and all of those with the didcom.org RFCs. So basically, the browsing of the protocols, turn it into more something that combines these. Like if you look at Action Menu 1.0, this says, hey, go look over here. What we want is a site that has all of the content of the protocols in the various state. We want AIP2 to be there. We want the DIDCOM2 ones to be visible versus the DIDCOM ones and things like that. So I would really like to see this repository replaced with, or this website replaced with one that combines content from this Aries RFC and perhaps others as they exist. That's my view. And with that, that completes what I was going to share. The big thing I would ask is if anyone is willing to help out. The biggest thing I would need is just ideas and direction on how to adjust this, make this more useful, and text to help out in organizing it. So if people want to help out, I'm happy to do I've played with make docs and shell scripts and the Python scripts enough that I don't really need help with that. I think any ideas we come up with, I can probably implement. It's just a matter of what are the best ways to do this and present it. And how do we do it so that this gets more valuable this should have been done 4 years ago, obviously, and evolved from there. But we can start it today and have it running. But things like getting to DIDCOM2, merging in the new protocols and things like that, I'd love to see. So with that, turn it back to you, Sam. And
Hey, not done yet. Any feedback or comments on Stephen's work? I'll offer a few. Number one, this is awesome. Um, and I think will make these substantially more approachable. Number two, it would be cool to inject at the top of each of the status links a page that has a brief explanation of like what that is. So when you click on, for example, like
Okay.
adopted,
Hmm.
and the
Yeah.
reason that's useful is that that's the page that's going to come up when you click adopted instead of just getting the first one in the adopted list.
Yeah.
And just a brief explanation that then like links to whatever else you need, I think would be really cool.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, I like pulling retired off, but I think we should still stick it in the menu option somewhere.
Yeah.
Just not necessarily highlighted at the top. I wonder too. Obviously, AIP2 is the thing. I wonder if we is your process for creating the AIP2 copies of things. Is that replicable? Like, was that a manually painful, or did you yank the lists out of the RFC?
Yeah. It's coded.
Cool. So
Yeah.
it would be cool to make a one like an AIP one that
Yeah.
then
I
you
debated that. Obviously, I can do that trivially.
but
I
then not
debated it.
highlight it at the top level. It would be nice to
Yeah.
stick it into like a another type of a section so that the attention really was drawn to the most important things.
Yeah. I just figured AIP one is obsolete at this point. So anyone coming to this need not even know it exists. That was why I didn't do it. Obviously, the first idea was AIP one, AIP two, and the scripts generate that. I can easily do it. Yeah, but that was the
Well,
point.
part of me was thinking we're going to have an AIP next at some point with the introduction to
Absolutely.
Bitcoin V2, and so
Yes.
have sort of highlighting the fact that there's history here, and then here's the newest one. I think is maybe a good plan.
Yeah,
That's
what
all.
I actually that brings me to one, which is why not create an AIP next, and generate it in so that we have the placeholder for it and the initial plan for it, and just code it so that even if it just has a single page, it says AIP3
Right.
will include these things. That one's easy to do as well. Again, the reworking the navigation is a combination of either you code the navigation generation or you hard code it in, and so I've got techniques for doing either, or combining the two.
Yeah, that's cool. Really neat. At some point, and I don't think that point's very far away, it's probably worth just merging that and then
Yeah.
updating it with PRs instead of, right? So, so yeah, but
Yeah. Sorry, what do you mean by merging it?
well, is it already, it's in a PR, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, what
Yeah.
I mean
Yeah.
is,
As soon as I add the GitHub action, the GitHub action will run the script, um, generate the GitHub pages, and yeah, so it leaves the rest of the site alone. The other thing we could do is move things around so that they're in the right spot, so that there's less movement in the script. But and the make docs is more straightforward, but that's not a big deal either way.
right, yes,
Yeah, so yeah, the only thing I didn't find yesterday was I got to go find a script that does. I've got a couple that use GitHub, that use versions. Hackapie has one that does versions, and I don't think we want versions on this. Um, it just gets generated, and the versions are inherent in it. So
yeah,
I just want to generate it. Yeah,
that's a good idea.
yeah.
Nice.
There you go.
Any other feedback or comments for Steven? Well done.
Is there any value in like adding any like time horizon information, like the AIP2 was uh like when
Hmm.
it came to be, or when it's expected to like end of life, or you know and for instance, if you're going to add a next, like what's the if there's any target for that, because it gives people an idea who are new to this, I think, what like what is going to be the near and medium term focus.
Yeah,
I think having
that's
the
a really
AIP
good idea.
summary page, yeah, an AIP summary page that calls that stuff out would be really cool.
Yeah,
And
so
then,
the introduction, so I'm planning on writing some content. As I say, I don't think the life cycle should be the welcome page. So that content can go there, and then so that will be just a markdown file in it. I like the idea, just as Sam suggested, of status being the initial page of the AIP. We do the same for an intro page to AIP2 that is more or less static. I'll probably just make it static. I could pull it out of the 302, but I think I'll just make it static so that it includes some additional information. And the fact that it replicates things is not a big deal. And then the idea of adding an AIP3 page, I think, is a good one. I didn't even think of it until I started talking, but I think that's a good one as well, as we add an AIP3 with just a page of content right now that pulls from some of the conversations we've had on these calls.
if we're going to have like a general summary of AIP, I think that might be the right place to include a link to AIP1, for example.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
here,
we could do that.
here's some
Yeah,
explanation, and I think that's a great idea.
yeah.
Totally. That's really, really good.
Cool.
Patrick, your hand's up.
Yeah, one idea. I think it's important to make sure that there's some links on GitHub or some place where if I visit the site, I know that I can either propose a change to the text or
Yeah.
create an issue and ask questions to make it as accessible for the visitors as GitHub was. Because I find those pretty good advantage of GitHub is like you don't understand something, you just open an issue in the repo. Now, since it will be a separate website, it will be so cool if there's easy way to raise a question about the particular RFC or EIP, whatever.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And remind me of two things. So that, again, that's what I see as the welcome page, if you will, that the landing page for the entire site will include that. What this is, what it's for, how to use the site, and then how to make comments. So that's a really good one. As you were saying that, I was also realizing that we wanted implementations place. So that welcome section would include an implementations and where to find it, where to find them, so that everyone who wants to can just add their own text. We've talked about that implementations, and then they can point to a place on their site that has here's the the Aries RFCs that we support. And maintain that. And then we talked about that a few weeks ago, was removing the implementation. So I think those are really good ideas for adding to that upfront page or section.
I also like the idea of having, I mean, this is along the same lines, right? But having a section that just details out. There's a link to because it's a Make Docs, there's a link to the GitHub. But I love the idea of having like a page that really draws it out and explains, right? So that you can encourage contribution and click this link.
Yep.
It'll take you to GitHub, open an issue, open a PR, stuff like that. So
Yep.
really cool.
Cool.
Anything else?
Sam, one thing. Stephen, do you think it's a good idea to put along with RFC, besides the implementation, where a use case where the RFC has been used, if we know that?
That gets into RFC specific things. So that would be harder. What I was thinking for the implementations is, say, Aries, we implement a number of these, and here's a point, here's an overview of this and a pointer to more information of what Aries RFCs are supported. Getting into specific details on on a specific RFC, I'm happy to see those added to the RFCs themselves. But I'm not sure how to make that generalized.
Can it be like if somebody, let's take for example, any of the use case in BC or any other places where
Okay,
I know that the Aries documentation, Helen and all were collecting that information of who's done it.
yes,
So if within the RFC, take any of them, whether it's a did exchange or whatever that may be,
okay,
and
yes,
just mentioning that if you want to know where how did exchange was used, contact this person or
yes.
or something like that.
Okay, now I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I think so. Less tied with, so to me, the implementation page can say whatever anyone wants about their implementation. And so
Right.
I think you're right. That's a really good way that people could advertise and say, here's where we're using it. And whether they are building on top of, whether it's, a pointer to Occupy, that's one thing, but where it's used on top or, bifold and then where it's used any time at any level that people have implemented things on Aries are welcome to add to that. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I get you. And that would be just a PR to that page.
Yeah, and the way the reason I was thinking about it is somebody new who comes, who's exploring Aries. They're not only coming to know about the protocol, but they are also coming to know how somebody's used it. It can
Yeah,
help them.
perfect. I get you. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Now I'm going to call you out to give me an example write-up of one.
I will do my best.
All right. Sounds good.
Awesome. Any other feedback on Stephen's work? Cool. Next on the agenda is Patrick. Patrick, do you want to share screen or just talk? What would you like?
Yeah, it just talk. So I don't need screen. So I'll just get into it. So a bit of an update on about VCX. As you know, Aries VCX is a Rust implementation of Aries and DIT-core/DIT-com components. And given that majority of the maintainers of VCX is working or contracting for APSA, I feel obligation to share update with you and news with you that APSA is leaving the SSI space and will no longer participate for given internal decisions that was made. And so that will impact probably also development of Aries VCX. I personally have time in my current contract till the end of April. So until then, I'll try my best to finish off any outstanding work in progress and try to leave in VCX in the best possible condition. And at the same time, I'll be trying to find I really wish to find a way to stay in the loop and keep the development of keep supporting the library if I can find such an opportunity. Maybe I also have I would like to ask you guys in this space. I would like to ask for a 5-minute slot next week to kind of share the holistic state of the state of the VCX repository. Perhaps share my thoughts on where I would like to ideally, or like what I think is the best future for the repo from technical perspective. If you have potentially interest in using VCX I would be very happy to engage with you, or else alternatively, if you have any open positions, I would love to stay in the SSI space. I'll be on a job hunt going forward, so feel free to reach out on Discord. I dropped my Discord handle in the wiki page, so it's there. And yeah, that's probably it. It's unfortunate news, but it is what it is. Really hoping that this thing can keep living, because I think there's some potential there, but well, that will be up to judgment of ultimately of the community or any potential adoptees. So thanks.
Thank you, Patrick. We're grateful for your work, and really hope that we can find a place for you in the community, because we value your presence here. Any questions or comments for Patrick? All right, Patrick. I've got a note here to give you more time next week on the agenda for the VCX coverage that you're talking about, and
yeah, that would be great. I think 5 minutes is enough. I'll try to be brief and on point.
Okay, sounds good. And then here's right in the notes is Patrick's Discord handle on the Hyperlogic Discord for getting in contact with him.
I have a real quick question for Patrick, if I may.
Please.
You mentioned ABS is leaving the SSI space. Without getting into too much detail, what are they using instead? Why did they make that decision?
There was basically a change of leadership somewhere past year, and SSI didn't make it to the top of the list of priorities. So it's not that they're using something different. The whole SSI thing is basically being wrapped up now.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Patrick? All right, Patrick, we appreciate the information and look forward to hopefully finding a spot for you in the community in a new engagement. Okay, next up is DidCom V2. This is the section from previous weeks, talking about the changes that need to be made to the existing protocols prior to adopting as part of a full DidCom V2 effort. And so these are the things on the list there that are needed. Has anyone begun work or is planning to, just for community coordination reasons? I'm planning to, but I don't know when it's going to hit. I've been able to finish up a few things, and so my future looks a little better. But I plan to get started, and it'll probably be easier to contribute after a start is made, and I recognize that, and I'll be trying to step that forward so that we can have a target to discuss. But here's those notes, and if you are interested or you have efforts, then please speak up so that we can support your efforts instead of duplicating them. But that's one of the next things up here is to produce the verifiable credential protocols that we want to move to as part of an AIP that targets adoption DidCom V2. Okay, so next up on the list is a discussion of common identifiers. It's been a long time since we've had this discussion. There are two PRs that relate to this. What I'd love to do is kind of cover what has happened and then talk about what's happened in the meantime since these PRs were created. There's two PRs that I wrote here. This was like in 2020, late 2020. So it's been a few years, and we've I think we've grown a lot in understanding. and these didn't really receive much attention at the point. And so these likely need to be revised at minimum to try and understand what we could do. The goal here is that DIDCOM itself provides no guarantees of who the owner of the DID is on the other side of the connection. DIDCOM itself, guarantees that you are talking to the DID on the other side, but the identification of a DID is sort of outside of the scope of DIDCOM, and this is something where verifiable credentials help. And so the idea here is a common understanding or some common governance around how to manage the verification of a party. There are some proposals that, for example, a .well known on a website that can be really useful for institutions, but there hasn't really anything sort of standardish been proposed for the identification of other people. So if I was to make a connection with, say Stephen or Bruce, having some mechanism by which that DIDCOM connection can be verified using a verifiable credential would be a really useful feature, and that's what that's what this is really addressing here. And so there's two RFCs that exist still as PRs, and one of them is the introduction of a goal code. And so this is what I had proposed at the time: receive verifiable identifier. And the idea here is that this could be included in an out-of-band invitation, or otherwise expressed the way goal codes can. And this would allow to say, hey, like when we begin communicating, I would really like to receive a verifiable identifier for you. And that could be answered in a variety of ways. And so domain control and email ownership are related here. And so this could be answered in several ways depending on what you actually are as an institution, if you're an institution or an individual. The second one here is a very early stab at a governance framework around the presentation of proof of email access. We often say email ownership. Ownership is a complicated word, and email access is generally what you're proving here, because you have gone through a process, through a verification party of clicking on a magic link in an email, which is not a crazy idea. That's been done a lot, but receiving a verifiable credential of that means that you're able to prove that you have done that independent of someone running their own test, which is really helpful when you're an individual instead of an institution without a website. And so the idea here would be that it specifies the protocols, the schema, and then issuers who are participating within this. And there are two things here. There's of course this RFC, and there's also a JSON file which contains sort of the beginning of, and I'll show you the updates that have happened since then. But this is a data file that can actually be consumed into software and then evaluated to decide if a credential being presented is actually valid according to this governance. And so this was an early idea, and we've come a long way. The point here was that as a community, we could decide that if we had volunteers within the community that would be willing to run an email service that would actually do this and issue verified email credentials, then those multiple issuers could be listed as part of this governance framework that we could then leverage either for practical reasons or for just demonstration purposes within the Aries community. And so this is a way of fulfilling the receive verifiable identifier goal code. I'm sure you can imagine other methods that could also satisfy this, including a verified phone number or a verified social media handle. Things like that would be really useful to look at an item, receive proof of who that actually is from someone, and then know with some confidence, according to the governance framework, that that's an accurate credential that represents proof of control over those identifiers. So this was really early work. This was years ago. I think the idea is still good, and it hasn't actually been done by anyone else in any other way. And so I think it still holds merit. One of the benefits here is that we had proposed, for example, here's a really lightweight governance framework JSON document. And over the past past year or so, we have been involved. I have been involved, and several others, with this credential trust establishment work. And this is the same idea about having a data file that's published that you can reference, but it's far more formalized in ways that make it really powerful. This spec is approaching the state where it can be ratified as a 1.0 spec by the diff. Right now, it's still a draft in the working group level. And so, as a brief tour of this, the document contains a handful of sections. There's metadata about it, about the governance itself, the schemas that are listed for the credentials involved, the participants that are involved in the ecosystem, for example, issuers of credentials, and there's a binding role element that kind of ties things together. And so as a real quick intro, here's what the metadata actually looks like. The docs URI, for example, could link to the RFC that explains in human terms about what that's actually doing. There's also a listed author, the DID of the author of the governance framework that is used to actually sign this document prior to publishing, which means that you can verify it and be sure that actually happened. And then there's trusted governance, which links to other things that other governance documents that the publisher of this document trusts. And so there's a way to set up simple, hierarchical or peer-to-peer based trust relationships among governance, which could be useful under the creation of something for like verified phone numbers or verified social media handles. And that way you can have governance that links to other governance, making it nicely decentralized. Versioning is supported. Schemas look like this. You have a URI that points to the schema of the credential itself with a human name attached for useful things. Skipping to the participants list, you can specify which participants have which roles during which time ranges. So if we had someone that either joined or left the role of issuing those credentials in the community, we can still accurately represent those so that previously issued credentials are still valid because of the time range, for example, that was issued, but also add new ones in a nicely organized manner. And so roles then tie together, which the presentation of which role, is authorized to issue by this governance file a particular schema. So this would be a lot simpler, and we have an example down here that was inspired by these early PRs, early RFCs. There's other useful things that you can do. For example, in bootstrapping an ecosystem, there's not often good methods to apply things like names or other metadata around DIDs, and so this allows you to do so within the document, which can be really convenient from a governance perspective. There's also a mechanism to allow alias DIDs, so that if you need to list more than one DID for a participant, maybe on different DID methods or moving from one DID to another, that there's a mechanism possible within there. Here's an example here of sort of a university diploma example with the full file of what this would actually look like. And then here's a different membership example. The Aries email ecosystem example probably needs to be renamed within the context of this specification, but this is a more higher manifestation of this previous JSON file that we had imagined. And so here's the idea. There would be email issuers that are recognized as such. There's also then the verified email addresses themselves. You can see that these are all just examples. This is not yet an attempt to actually make a statement about this. One of the fun things we could discuss is the DID actually used for the Aries working group and under what control it actually is. But here's the Aries working group is represented there, and then here's an example verified email issuer. We've got Acme Corp here, and then there's the roles. As necessary, the email issuer, for example, is assigned to Acme Corp. And then, of course, the roles binding here. And so this would be a more advanced, more modern example, and that would replace this JSON file there, and then can operate against that. The value then is that this is pretty easy to evaluate in a Boolean manner. You ask the question, was issuer A authorized to issue credential B at time T. And that's according to the governance, and that's a Boolean answer. You can definitively process this and say yes or no to make that happen. Now, there's lots of ways you can use governance, but I think it would be useful as a community to produce an example of how community members or how regular people can identify themselves to other people using common identifiers like email addresses, phone numbers, social media handles, etc. I think is a good way to do that because it allows me to associate the new connection that I have on my phone with people that I likely already communicate with. I might already have an email address or a phone number for an individual, which means that that's an easy way to compare and to verify that those things, that this is in fact the Bruce that I think it is, or the Stephen that I think it is. And so that's a brief tour through sort of the modern work against this governance called credential trust establishment, and then against the original ideas that I had proposed that we didn't manage to make any progress on previously. So with that, I'm curious what folks think about this. If you have any questions, or if this is something that we're actually at the point where we should do something about this and actually demonstrate the use of something like this from a credential perspective in order to show and use a practical example of how to identify each other from a human-to-human perspective. Technically speaking, it could also be a business-to-human perspective, right? If a business is asking for a verified identifier for a person, but the central thing is a person being able to share some proof about who they are using well-known identifiers. Comments, questions? I apologize for talking so long.
Yeah, I have a question.
Please.
My question's very practical. So let me start by saying I really like this. I think email does a lot of things these days, and not all of it's good. So given that email for practical purposes consists of things like Apple Mail and Outlook and stuff like that, it consists of the apps. How do you propose integrating this into common usage without, I guess where I'm going is, if we can integrate with common usage, meaning typical email readers, that will be easier to make this happen than creating new email applications.
Well, I'm not at all proposing that we actually use email, just that we use the proof of an email address ownership as a way to sort of bootstrap some trust across, a connection. So I don't want to change email so much. I just want to be able to leverage from the identifiers that people are familiar with into some level of trust over a DIDCOM connection that then further has no interaction with email. Does that make sense?
Okay. I thought you were trying to put some improvements on email, and I was wondering how we would do that.
No, that's not my attempt. My attempt is simply to leverage the known identifiers into something else. For example, you can do the same thing with a phone number where you get a text and you type in the number to verify that you get messages for that phone number. And that's not necessarily an indication that we should use the phone number, just the fact that it could display to me, for example, if I make a connection with you, you can prove your email address or your phone number, and then I'm going to look at that and say, oh, well, this is the email address that I thought Steve had. And because he just presented me a credential of ownership from an issuer that I trust, then now I'm going to have a more trust that this connection is in fact the Steve that I think it is. So it's really about transitive trust from existing or known identifiers onto a DIDCOM connection than really the use of those identifiers directly at all.
That makes a lot of sense. Any thoughts on going the next level and helping email itself improve?
No. I mean, I'm not opposed, but I think that starting smaller is enough work. So yeah, I hadn't really, I mean, I've thought super abstractly about it, but not in any practical terms.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. All right. When I don't know, the way I read the 13.4 title on the previous page you were showing, it just struck me as, wait, is that what we're trying to do? Which is a good goal, but it's an ambitious one.
Yeah, I'm less ambitious. At this point, I'd really just like to be able to prove person to person who you really are.
Got it. All right. Thanks.
Absolutely. Subhasis.
Yeah, hi, is Sam. I have to listen to everything you said again, but to really digest it better. But my first question is, how does this relate to the Trust over IP Trust Registry Task Force?
That's a good question. So this credential trust establishment work seeks almost entirely to serve the same goals, but there are some fundamental differences in the way that this work has been pursued as opposed to the Trust over IP Trust Registry Task Force. Specifically, this is a signed and published file, which is a really low barrier to entry. That's pretty easy for anyone to do. Technically speaking, the Trust Registry Task Force is promoting an API-driven approach. And I think you can agree that even an efficiently run API requires more resources than the hosting of a signed document. And so they're very similar. We have had conversations about what to do. The task force seems pretty unbending on an API-driven approach. There is the acknowledgement in the Trust Registry Task Force at the Trust over IP that an offline mode would be really useful. And the idea has been floated lightly that this format could in fact be the format for the offline use by that working group. So that if you requested sort of an offline file, you can end up with this data format that then could be used to process offline, which of course this could do naturally as its ability to be cached and referenced offline.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, API is just one aspect of it, which is, but anyway, so leaving that aside, is the purpose, is this data a system of truth that can be trusted? Is that the goal, that the data you're getting as part of, like all the definitions that exist in this model, is it the goal is to trust that information because who writes it and who has signed it? Is that the goal of it?
Yes, specifically, if you decide to trust the publisher of this document,
Uh-huh.
then you trust the stuff in the document. And it allows for sort of a foundation of trust to build on within the scope of this defined ecosystem. And you can have multiples of these, of course, but it allows you to sort of draw a line and say, I'm going to use this thing as a foundation for accepting credentials from others in a way that works really well.
Yeah, and at that point, I think there is the way, at least I understand the trust registry task force work and this thing, I think they're the same things. API to me is just a technology of how to get that information. And there can be many ways and it can evolve into many ways. But I think that concept of what you just said is pretty much the same, at least the way I understand it. So that's why it looks
I
like.
don't disagree. I think it is the same.
Right. Okay.
The difference is that even from early discussions, the fact that it must be made available via an API was something that was not a requirement that we could live with. And we already had started this work. This existed prior to the current round of the early forms of this had existed prior to the current round of that task force. And so we have continued the work because of the lack of alignment with the goals of that task force at Trust over IP.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. This is good. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Stephen.
Don't have a lot of time to cover this, but I want to, a couple of things that I've learned about lately in some of the related work I've done might be helpful here. One was, and these are just building blocks. They're not commenting on overall what you were talking about here, but I want to throw out a couple of ideas as building blocks. One of them is, Drummond pointed out to me the other day that there was a very intentional attempt to make a DID that represents a web resource such as a document. So it's called out in the DID spec that a DID can have an also known as that is a web link. And therefore a document can be a DID. And that's how those connect. And it basically works as a redirect. You resolve the DID, which sees that there's a web resources and also known as, so it evolves that, so it gets that. Now, I don't know that how much that is used, but I point that out as a possible building block for some of these things. I haven't thought enough about whether that could be. And then the other part that we've been doing a lot of is there's a lot of places, such as in the traceability work, where a VC is used as a signed document, where all you're doing is publishing the VC, and it gets the benefit of being, this is content that is signed. And therefore, again, formatting a bunch of these things that need to be signed as just VCs is not a bad approach. So I just throw those two possibilities out there as ways of signing things, is just use a VC.
Yes, and that's actually allowed within the spec. The actual hosting location, including access control if it's necessary, and the method of signing and packaging is entirely left to a profile of the spec.
Okay.
And so that is certainly allowed. There's a philosophical discussion about, like, should we hit every hammer or every nail with a VC hammer? But it is certainly not excluded from that manner.
The thing I'm pointing out is that in our community, we very much think of VCs as issued to a holder and presented by a holder. And the use of VCs in other communities is much more, it's just published. It's sitting out there. Anyone can see it. But it has the benefit of being signed. It has a structure to it and so on. So that's the building block that I'm pointing out.
Totally. And that's something that is allowed.
Yeah.
We are out of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can bring this topic up again next week. I'm grateful for the time here, and I would love to discuss this more because I think that there's some good learning stuff that could happen here, and I would love to actually do this. I would love to demonstrate the use of this within the community in a really useful fashion, because I think there is lots of talk about governance. But only a few demonstrations, and the existing demonstrations that I know of in the community tend to be very, very large efforts. And I think a demonstration of something like this would promote the right discussions about how to do this within ecosystems, including ecosystems that are not global in scale. I like global scale ecosystems, but there's this thought that you have to be at the global level in order to make something work. And I think this would be a good demonstration of something that can exist within a company or a community or an industry vertical or something like that to show people, how this governance work can actually happen. So very cool. I will bring this up again, and I can do a briefer review next time, and then we can talk about the practical application of this. And I think that would be a really cool exercise. And so we will do that. I'll leave it on the agenda for next time. And then Steve, I want to highlight you mentioned that you will, when it's released, you have a paper comparing the approaches, and that'd be really informative as well. Cool. Thanks, folks. Have a great week. Thanks for your involvement here and all the work that you do. And we will see you around other places and next week.
Thank you.